in terms of the, like, do you think even from like the Masons, the average Mason who is visiting or attending lodge, say in that building, to the people of Detroit who use the building, whether it be to go to a concert, go to a wedding, are they aware of the amount of upkeep, do you think, and work that goes into maintaining a space like the Detroit Masonic Temple?
Yes and no. Because I usually like when people come to the building, say like for a tour or something like that, we usually get like, wow, it must take so much to keep a building like this up. It must cost a fortune to do what you need to do. So we do get some element of that, but a lot of times the people are just there for a concert. They're probably just focusing like on the actual concert itself. They're not just actually looking at the details and whatnot. So it's a little bit of both in that regard.
And what about the Masons themselves, like the membership that is attending lodge there?
Um, Kind of roughly the same element. I mean, obviously, if you're there's a difference if you're in a building like once, maybe twice a year, compared to if you're in a building like almost every week. You hear a bit more of the details about some of the work that's being taken on in the building. You obviously see a bit more of the actual elements, and obviously you get updates on that in terms of the business meetings and whatnot. Get to talk to the employees, the temple management. So a little bit of both. I mean, obviously it's a rich tapestry in terms of the membership. I mean, some brothers come down just more for the social aspect. Some are a bit more interested in what goes on in the building. They're a bit more involved in that process. So it's a little bit of both in that regard as well.
And we'll start by talking about the physical structure before we go on to the intellectual property, the plans, the blueprints. I'll link an article that I found and that was sent out in this video. Tell me though about the chandelier restoration project, because that seems, I know the brother who did it, most of the work isn't, or I think did almost all the work isn't available today. But just in general, like, tell me about that project, because just reading about it seems amazing.
So yeah, that project was done by Brother Brandon Langford. Brandon does quite a bit at the temple. He's currently the senior deacon at Zion Lodge. He is a member of the Masonic Temple Association. He is the curator of the organs at the temple, and he heads up the nonprofit that's raising funds to restore eventually all three of our pipe organs to working condition. So that was a process that took about 6 months. It took about 1,300 hours total to get the chandeliers back to where they are today. And essentially what that happened was that the chandeliers had the same thing in terms of some of the other places in the building. You had close to 100 years of dirt and grime and dust that had just accumulated on there. I mean, you figure hundreds and hundreds of events, over time. And there was a time long ago where smoking was allowed in the crystal ballroom. So, you had a lot of that too. So we've got two very large chandeliers in the crystal ballroom. Each one weighs about 1.5 tons. There's a total, can't remember the exact amount of lights on it, but it's about 31,000 lights on them total in terms of the overall crystal pieces. Each one has individual crystal pieces on that. So the chandeliers, along with the rest of the lighting in the building, was designed by Corrado Parducci, the building artisan, and they were manufactured by the Sterling Bronze Company out of Ithaca, New York. We were the last major order for Sterling Bronze. We placed the order in 1925. They were bankrupt in 1930. So basically what he did over the course of 6 months is he very painstakingly removed each and every one of the crystals on the chandeliers, strand by strand, and in some cases piece by piece. Hypersonic cleaned them. He's got an area set up where he did all this, and then very painstakingly put them back. And often, many cases, the wires had to be restored. A lot of the original electrical sockets had to be restored. So there was a bit of work there that had to be done as well. So, this was a very detail-oriented process, obviously. Also, in many cases, some of the glass pieces had been they'd been damaged over the years, or some cases they were missing. So he actually had a professional glass blower working in tandem with him in some cases as well, actually getting that done as well, replacing some of those missing pieces. For instance, there's some smaller pieces on the bases that resemble leaves. Most of those have been damaged or destroyed, so they had to replace those as well. So that was a very detailed process that took place over the course of 6 months, and he volunteered his time too. He didn't get paid for this. This is something he did of his own kind of volition. So it's an amazing process from start to finish, and they look phenomenal.
And how did again, I'll link the article in the description, but how did the press find out about it? And did they talk at all about, why they decided to cover the restoration project?
Well, we've had a few articles over the and again, this is a process that started back in like 2018, 2019. We've got a few links with local media. One of the positions that I do is outreach and whatnot to the public, to a somewhat lesser extent media relations as well. We also posted there's an historical Detroit architecture Facebook group that has over 40,000 followers, so that they got picked up there, and I think that's where the local media found out about that. So that got picked up, that got shared. Then local media came calling. I know historicdetroit.org, I believe, did an article. I believe Channel 7 did an article as well. And it was perfect timing too, because of dovetailing into the 100th anniversary of the Cornerstone laying at the end of September. So that was also a way to kind of get some local media attention there as well.
And how important is public relations, media outreach, social media involvement for specifically for the Detroit Masonic Temple, but in your opinion, more in general, how important is it for any larger Masonic temple, Masonic building, Masonic hall, is kind of really anywhere, but especially say in North America?
Particularly for a building the size that we are, we kind of consider ourselves to be a Masonic monument in many respects. We're certainly the top 5 in terms of overall obvious size and overall importance. So it's important, particularly for us, to be at the forefront of media relations and have an active social media presence. But and to a greater extent, I believe that Masonic organizations in general, it's important to do that as well. So it's important not only to let both Masons and non-Masons know what you're doing in terms of overall activity, but it's also important to kind of have a wider audience to kind of spread the word of what you're doing, but also kind of dispel some of the negatives that are out there. So this way, I don't want to say that you're controlling the medium and controlling the message per se, but you can manage it to a greater extent. I mean, you can improve that communication, and you can dispel a lot of myths. You can attract the kind of the right membership that you want, and it also shows that, hey, our organization's alive, our organization's doing things. So it's important. I believe that every Masonic organization have like an active, if not a social, I know not everybody's well versed with social media, but it's very important that you have at least an online presence. It's very important that you let folks know who you are and what you're doing.
And what type of response did you receive, or have you received from your social media involvement in particular? Because speaking for the Windsor Masonic Temple, when I posted pictures and videos and images from the Windsor Masonic Temple on our social media sites, at least locally in Windsor, the response we received from members of the public sharing stories and memories from this building was just amazing. I'm curious if you've had the same experience on your end promoting the Detroit Masonic Temple through social media.
Yeah, a lot of cases we do get that. So I manage a couple social media pages. One of them is for the Detroit Masonic Temple Library, Archive, and Research Center, where I currently direct that organization. And one of the things I do is help out with the social media. And we often get that quite a bit, particularly when we share like a larger audience, like a group or something like that. And we often get people say, yeah, my college graduation was there in 1975, or I saw Jimi Hendrix there in 1968, or I met my wife there in 1973, or I remember as a child, I went to Masonic Lodge installations there. I have some fond memories. So usually we get people posting stuff like that about that all the time because Masonic Temple is kind of a catalyst for a lot of positive memories for a lot of folks, both Masonic and non-Masonic. So we get that quite a bit, and a lot of times too, we get people that say, hey, I thought that this was happening at the temple, and it turns out, well, no, we can dispel some of that. I mean, like some stuff, like urban myths, like George Mason, the architect, did not, in fact, jump to his death from the roof in 1948. He passed away of natural causes, things like that. And no, we're not doing any nefarious activities or anything like that. And, that, along with the tours, we try to dispel a lot of the negative myths that kind of crop up around masonry. And a lot of times too, it's like, some folks like, hey, I didn't know this was still an active Masonic building. So it's really interesting to learn more about that. So we kind of use that kind of as a tool to, again, not so much to manage the message per se, but to let folks know like who we are and what we're doing. So,
The when you talk about the myths, or dispelling some of those myths that are just so frequent on social media, nature of the beast, I think in 2022 with social media, they've always existed, but I think social media in particular has a tendency to kind of not to multiply these type of myths. How do you go about dispelling them? So, for example, you talk about posting on social media. If you say because this question just came up to me, if you have a comment, or if you have somebody contacting you or commenting on social media and bringing forward some of these myths, some of these rumors, whatever they are, how do you go about dispelling them, or dealing with them on your social media site? Because I know different lodges, different Masonic organizations are looking at having a more active social media presence, but their concern, or at least their concern they've expressed to me, is how do we keep the trolls at bay, and how do we keep some of the negative stuff in social media from taking over?
well, you had to be careful where and how you engage. Obviously, like, I mean, if you get like somebody make like an anti-Masonic comment on a post, it's sometimes it's just best to just ignore it or just ban and delete them and move on. But you do get a fair share of that, and sometimes, I mean, you get like the inevitable messages, from someone in West Africa asking them to help you join the Illuminati. I mean, no, sorry, can't help you there. But typically, a lot of it is just education. A lot of folks, I mean, there's a lot of not necessarily well intended, but there's a lot of kind of somewhat cautious myths around it. It's like, I didn't know that. Again, it kind of goes back to a lot of the element of kind of perception. It's like, I didn't know the building was still an active Masonic building. I didn't know, who Masons are and what they do. Because, obviously we get folks on tours that say, I've been here before for concerts and events and whatnot, but I had no idea what goes on upstairs, past the lobbies, past the theaters. So this is very helpful. And a lot of cases too, is just answering certain questions. Like every once in a while, like someone will post like, who owns the building? What goes on with the building? Or someone will post something like, just, I really don't know what Masons are and what they do. So a lot of that is in terms of kind of starting a dialogue, just addressing some of those myths in terms of perceptions that people just kind of formed over the years. And obviously, like I said, you can't, it's not really a good idea to engage with everybody as far as that goes, because some people just are frankly just too far gone. But it's a tool in terms of letting people know that what Masonry is not necessarily what they told, what they were taught. So it's very helpful in that regard.
Now, I want to go on and talk about the other aspect of the project, at least that I read about in the September newsletter. So there's preservation of the physical structure, the physical items within the structure, chandelier, right? But then there's also the preservation of the records and documents and historical items that are kind of part and parcel with any historical building. And I know we talked about our last podcast, you've done a lot of work already in that area. But one area, one set of records that at least I read you are now working on preserving and protecting digitally, physically, is the blueprints of the Detroit Masonic Temple. So can you tell me a little bit about your work in that regard?
Sure. Now, one of the things that the Detroit Masonic Temple Library, Archive, and Research Center is responsible for is storage and preservation of the various blueprints for the temple. We have all the original copies. We have several copies. I mean, there are copies of copies of copies. I mean, it's a 100-year-old building. A lot of people needed access to some of the sets and whatnot. So right now, we're focusing on preservation of the originals right now. And that's a process that has been an ongoing one. There have been various forms and guises over the years of that. I mean, we've had various folks for making copies of that for their own use, as far as like within the building, for concerts, for maintenance issues and whatnot. But right now, what we're focusing on is scanning the originals. So that's a process that is probably going to take at least another 1 to 2 years in terms of overall needs, overall focus and whatnot. And obviously, because we have several thousand sets, so it's not something we can get done all at once. And plus, we have to be careful in terms of transportation. I always get worry beads whenever we have an original plan leave the building for any reason. But so obviously, we have to be careful in terms of maintenance, in terms of transportation. So that is sorry, cat attack. That is largely being taken up by Dawn Billebrand. She's the former temple project manager. She is well versed in terms of historic preservation. She's an architectural historian, so she's been a great help there as well. So that's something that's been needing to be done for quite some time, and very happy that this is in motion. And again, this is a process. It's going to take a while, but I'm very happy that it's happened. So.
How important is it, in your opinion, how important is it to digitally preserve any document, I suppose, but especially these original documents, to make sure there's a digital backup available and present?
It's essential because any archive, for the most part, is going to have issues in terms of preserving original documents. You can do everything you can. I mean, you can have like special folders. You can have acid-free folders. You can have UV-resistant materials and whatnot. But eventually, well into the future, it's eventually going to become unusable. So that's something you're going to have to do in terms of that regard as well. So it's essential for us because, again, these are the original blueprints. And it's not just the blueprints, too, that we're working on as well. I mean, we're actually cataloging and prioritizing certain items that we're going to have scanned or in the process of digitally preserving as well. So that's important for any archive or any research institution, any research library to do. But for us, it's particularly important that we preserve a lot of the original documents and the blueprints especially. We have a room set aside within the library that's the controlled access specifically for the blueprints. And I should mention that we actually have very large blueprint cabinets coming on the way. They're through Gaylord Archival. They were ordered a few months ago. They'll be here sometime in January. They have to custom make them. They're very large scale size, very large scale dimensions. That was through the generous support of the Detroit Masonic Temple Association. They basically paid for them to the tune of $30,000. So that was a huge help for us. So that's definitely going to go a long way in terms of keeping the blueprints safe. So I'm very excited about that as well.
And how often, when it comes to these digital archives, digital backups, how often, or even to what do you guys, does the Detroit Masonic Temple, the Library and Archive branch, do you have members of the public contacting you about looking at some of these records for historical research purposes? Do you have other Masons? What is the who is taking advantage of these digital copies outside of the benefits of preservation and protection of the information? I mean, my assumption is there's also an ease of use factor where instead of having somebody show up and have to look through these big documents, you can just send an email or scanned document to them.
So we don't get a great amount of requests for looking at documents or scans for the most part, but we do have on occasion people doing research about the building, and obviously we have to, because that's not something we just like hand out to anybody. We have to actually talk with them, kind of get a level of what they're looking to do for their project, why specifically they need to look at those plans. So we have had that happen. We do get contacted by folks doing Masonic research, usually of the genealogical variety, so we can kind of help them along that way. Every once in a while, they'll want to actually look at documents from, we don't have, well, I should kind of backtrack. We don't have a lot of documents in terms from other Masonic organizations per se, but we have collected quite a bit over the years. A lot of it's from lodges that no longer meet in the building. So we do have a few records in terms of minutes, membership records, financial records, things like that. And some folks doing research into family relations have found that helpful. A lot of times too, we've got folks doing, actually Masons, doing research about the history of their lodges and whatnot, or a specific biographical piece, or things like that. So we've often been able to help in that regard as well. So while we don't get an overwhelming amount of requests for that, we can help depending on the project, depending on its scope. So
it looks like your cat is hungry, so I don't want to keep you too much longer or keep your poor cat too much longer. But I do want to ask, how did the rededication and anniversary celebration go, which took place not that long ago, about 2 weeks ago, the end of September?
Yeah, so that took place on September 24th, and that was a really great event. That took quite a bit of planning and logistics. It started close to 2 years ago for that, and we kind of made up for lost time a little bit because we have 3 anniversaries this decade. We have the 100th anniversary of the groundbreaking from 1920, the 100th anniversary from the cornerstone laying in 1922, and coming up in 2026, we'll have the 100th anniversary of the building dedication. And unfortunately, we weren't able to do a whole lot for the groundbreaking in 2020, but 2022, this September 24th is when that happened. We were able to celebrate the cornerstone centennial, and that went very well. We had the Grand Lodge of Michigan, Grand Lodge officers come out and do the cornerstone rededication. So that was a very impressive ceremony. We had an honor guard from Detroit Commandery. We were well represented Masonically, not only by the Masonic organizations within the temple, but also all throughout Metro Detroit and beyond. So we had a very good turnout of brothers for that. So that was very inspiring to see. We had a gala celebration in the Fountain Ballroom. And I should mention the Fountain Ballroom is under renovation too. We've redone the paint. We've replaced a lot of the original lighting, the wallpaper. The original fountain is going to be restored to its former glory as well too. So that's an ongoing project as well. So we had a very nice dinner down there. We had a good speaker, a couple good speakers. Folks had a really good time, and I think pretty much everybody left happy. So it was quite an event. It's thankfully, I'm kind of glad that we don't do this all the time because it's a lot of work. There's a lot that goes into it, but it was a really good time. So it's obviously that's something we had to commemorate, and we did it in style.
Well, now that the tunnel bus is reopening again from Windsor to Detroit the end of November, I definitely want to return to Detroit Masonic Temple, Zion Lodge, any lodge. It's been way too long since I've had the chance to be there. And it seems like on my Facebook feed, just outside of Masonic events, just for the general public, it seems like the building is really picking up again in terms of concerts and events and things happening. So would you, just in your experience with the easing, knock on wood, the ending of COVID and COVID related restrictions, have you found that there's a real demand that concerts are coming back, that events are coming back, weddings, graduations, whatever they may be?
Oh yeah. We've had quite a bit of concerts. Our first concert after the end of most of the COVID restrictions was August of 2021, and since then, AEG Entertainment manages both of our theater spaces. They currently have a long-term lease, and they've put quite a bit of time and effort and money into renovating those spaces. They handle most of our concerts. They're booking quite a few of them. September was a really busy month for shows. This month we've had a couple shows. They've got them booked well into next year, so that's really picking up. Weddings, we've always been a popular wedding venue, primarily because of the Commandery Asylum on the third floor. That's a popular venue, and folks will often have the wedding receptions downstairs in the Crystal Ballroom. So that's always been a popular spot for it. We have a wedding pretty much every Saturday. One thing we found after COVID too is that folks will often get married on dates they usually wouldn't be popular for that, Friday evenings, Sunday afternoon, sometimes even during the week. So we're very busy for weddings, and corporate events really haven't come back yet to the extent they were pre-COVID, but they are starting to trickle back in a little bit. Not quite on the scale they once were, but we're seeing a few here and there. But as far as events go in the building, we're pretty much back to a pre-COVID level.
That is awesome to hear. And I hope it stays that way, because it's as I said, I've always tried with this podcast to champion our built heritage, our Masonic architecture, Masonic buildings. And, the Detroit Masonic Temple is probably, if not the best, one of the best examples of why it should be championed and why it should be promoted, because it is such a valuable and important piece of not just Masonic history, but of this region's history, of Detroit's history, even of Windsor's history. And it's great to see the work being done to protect it and preserve it and to promote it. All of those things that I think are necessary for our buildings that aren't done nearly enough. So, I would just say thank you to yourself, to everybody who's done the work to help keep the Detroit Masonic Temple such an important part of the architecture, the mosaic of Detroit.
Well, thank you. I often say that the Detroit Masonic Temple is a vision in stone. Basically, what that means is that it's kind of the image of the original architect, the original planners, not just for Freemasonry, because it was meant to be like a large-scale monument, not only to the craft, but also a permanent meeting space for the brothers of the city of Detroit and beyond. But also, it's an eternal testament to what people can do when they truly work together, when they truly put their minds to something, and we have an enduring legacy to keep. We have a charge to uphold. It's not always easy. It takes a lot of work, but it's one that we take very seriously, and it's one that I'm personally proud to be a part of. One thing I should mention is that in early November, our tours will resume. They're currently on break this month. So folks want to check out the building in person. That's a great way to do it. The proceeds help to benefit the library. Tickets are available at themasonic.com. We can also do custom tours depending on date and dose and availability as well. So if folks are always interested, that's a great way to come see and learn more about the building.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for everything that you do. And I hope to be back at the Detroit Masonic Temple soon.
All right. Thanks for having me on again, Brother Cameron. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and hope to see you back at the temple sometime soon.